Good evening, good evening. Thank you so much for joining Respus Live. Happy Monday, everyone. Happy Monday. I am so excited to be here on this evening for this town hall. Thank you so much for joining us on this evening. If you would please, at this moment, start a watch party and please share this video. I promise you tonight we will be empowered, we will be healed, we'll be ready to move forward. And the name of our show, the topic of our podcast tonight is, where do we go from here? If someone would please hashtag, where do we go from here? That is the subject of our topic on tonight. Again, if you would please start a watch party, and thank you so much for joining. Happy Monday, everyone. It is such a great day to be alive, and we're so glad that you are spending this hour with us. Again, please start a watch party and share this video. So tonight we'll have a discussion on race relations in today's society. It's a very uncomfortable topic, but it is something that we do need to discuss because of the things that are going on in this world. So there are so many forms of racism that we've seen, and we cannot help but to know that they're there. So tonight, we want our voice to heal. We want our voice to help. We want our voice to be a part of this process. And so tonight, we're going to introduce you to our amazing panel. And our first question for our panel tonight is, I would like for each of them to share a racism, the first experience they had, and how it impacted their lives. Was it positive? Was it motivated? Or was it a negative experience?
Good evening. My name is Aquanetta Beatty. I am a citizen of Brunswick County, so grew up around just a lot of different things I could say about racism, but for the most part, I think my mother shielded me from a lot of the things that happened around us racially. So mostly, I think my name kind of became very racial with some situations, because when someone would see Aquanetta on the resume, I think that it went into the trash can rather than looking at the resume for my actual talents and abilities. So that would have to be one of the main things that I think has been a racial thing for me.
My name is Wesley Hickman. I'm a Brunswick County resident. I've been there pretty much my whole life. I grew up in Hickman's Crossroads near the Calabash area. I currently live in Leland, and I own a pharmacy in the area, Hickman's Pharmacy. I was kind enough to be asked by Sharon to be on her podcast a few months ago, so thank you for that. I do appreciate it. As far as racism and my experience with that, the very beginning of it, I'd have to say, would be the beginning of my life. Growing up in the South, it's something that, I hate to say it, but you see at a very young age in your household. If you're a white male or female, it's something that I think you do see a lot of. The thing I remember the most of, and I wouldn't necessarily say it was a negative experience for me, but my grandfather, for lack of a better word, had an indentured servant for, until the day he died. He always helped my grandfather do work in the field, he had a tobacco farm, Hickman's Crossroads, fished, did things like that. And I just remember whenever my dad told me what he paid Marion, the guy that worked with him, my grandfather, it was a box of cigarettes a month, I think it was either a month or a week, $100 a week, and basically gave him a place to stay. And you hear racial epithets and things like that said around whenever he wasn't around, but it's stuff that I think sticks with you as a child, and when you grow up in that environment, you become desensitized to it, and it's really sad looking back on it now as an adult, the things that I saw and things that I just didn't see were bad until I became an adult. So this obviously is an uncomfortable topic to discuss, but it is something I think is important to discuss so we can learn how to move forward.
Hi, I'm Krista Holland, and I am glad to be here tonight. I am a native of Alamance County, that's in the Burlington area, and I grew up predominantly in an all-black area until I was about 6 years old when I began school. And even though my school was integrated, I recall very significantly as a fifth grade student when Roots came on, the miniseries aired on TV. I had always interacted with our white peers. We'd never really had any issues. And once that miniseries aired, we had students who our white students began to say that they were better than us. And I distinctly remember having a black PE teacher, and the white students said they were better than us, and they wanted to challenge us to a kickball game. And they far outnumbered us. And I remember my PE teacher, who was a black female, and I don't know why she did it, but she allowed us to participate in that kickball game. And needless to say, I don't know if it's a stereotype, but we were very athletic, and we won the kickball game. And as I reflect on that, I don't know if that was the right decision or the wrong decision, but I distinctly remember her, I think, making that decision because they were so adamant that because of the color of their skin, that they were better than the black students at everything. And that was my first experience with racism. And I am currently an educator. This is my 27th year in education, and I'm currently a principal in New Hanover County Schools. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Janae Young. I'm a sophomore at Stanford University studying management science and engineering, and I was born and raised here in Wilmington, North Carolina. I think that my first experience with race was when Obama was elected in 2008. And although I wasn't exactly completely aware of what was going on at the time, I remember the sense of camaraderie that I felt with his election, and I knew that something big was going on in our country that hadn't happened before. I took a class at Stanford called How to Make a Racist. It's a psychology class into the factors that really make someone racist, and we also were asked the question of the first time that we encountered racism. And I think growing up in Wilmington, I was often called white by peers, teachers, staff, just adults in my life, students in my life, people who I considered friends. And so I think the biggest negative impact that racism has had on my life is what it meant for who I could be as a black woman, and the fact that I wasn't, quote unquote, allowed to be black based on the way that I talked or the way that I dressed. And I slowly started to see as I was coming of age that America has such a narrow perception of what a black woman could be. And the fact that I wasn't allowed to be that was something that I struggled with growing up a lot. It wasn't until I got older that I was able to find confidence in who I was as a black woman, but the fact that I had to go through that regardless is something that so many black women deal with when growing up, and one of the many negative impacts of racism that factored into my life.
Hi, my name's Tina St. Pierre. I'm from the area originally, and I think my first experience with race was when I was young. My dad owned a farm, and I worked, was around, a lot of people of different races, and I remember being a child, and I liked a boy, and I said that I liked him, and they said, well, you can't because he's a different race than you are. And I just remember as a child, you just didn't see race and just weren't aware of it. So that was my first experience.
My name is Troy Simmons. I'm from Supply, North Carolina, Brunswick County. My first experience with racism would most likely, I don't know. And that's a funny question, Ms. Sharon, because there's been a bunch of different experiences that I've had. But one that really sticks out, I was dating a white young lady. Her brother got killed in an accident, and I look at him as my brother, right? So I remember comforting her, and her grandma called, and I'm thinking, her grandma's gonna call to check on her and make sure that she's all right. But the thing that her grandma said was, would you please not bring your colored friend to the funeral? So that's the one that sticks out. The anniversary of his death was just a couple of days ago, so that's one that sticks with me.
My name is Pastor Jermaine Armour, pastor of the St. Luke Church here in the city of Wilmington. I'm a native of Buffalo, New York, born and raised. In Buffalo, like many cities, the town is very, very segregated. I guess my first remembrance of racism that I encountered was actually shocking. I was in the 3rd grade. It was a white teacher who came over to me and we had been kind of being a little loud with our friends. Vividly, I remember her bending down and telling me to shut up. I looked at her in shock, and she literally punched me in my arm. After that, I definitely went home and told my parents, and my stepfather came to the school. Wasn't pretty at all. But on the ride home, when I was in the 3rd grade, he told me why she hit me, and that was kind of my introduction to racism. And to this day, I can vividly remember getting punched in the arm by one of my white teachers.
Thank you so much, Pastor Armour. Thank you all for sharing your first experience with racism. And as you can tell on tonight, that we all have had different experiences and it affected us differently. And so tonight we're going to speak on subjects like this. We need to talk about it so that we can begin to heal and begin to make a change. So each one of us take our experiences and make what was bitter better so that we can all move forward, because we have to get to a place where it doesn't matter what color your skin or if you're male or female. We have to get to a place where we are united as one. My next question is, in the midst of COVID-19 and all the changes that accompany this pandemic, we swiftly moved into a movement about race and inequality. How do you feel, Aquanetta, about the changes and the movement, and how has that changed you?
I really think that this COVID-19 has really helped us to see things in a different light. And with that in mind, everything that we do is affected by COVID-19 now. So I feel like with church, with work, just being out in the market or whatever you're doing, it's caused us to really open up our minds and see people for who they are. So I really feel like the cover is being pulled from over people and the way that they act and the different things that they do. I just can see myself when I go into the grocery store and I have on a mask, you know, no one wants to speak. It's almost like people feel like you have the COVID and you're actually, you know, a threat or something to them. So it really makes you try to be more friendly or try to reach out to people, because I know a lot of people are hurting, and I know that a lot of people are home all day long, you know, and not doing things that they normally do. So it's causing them to have to really deal with themselves. And I think that that is what is really bad about this for some people, is because they don't want to really deal with who they are. And it's like looking in the mirror and you see yourself and you say, what can I do better today that I didn't do yesterday? And I think COVID is doing that for us.
I think that given the situation where we watched a very public and brutal murder of George Floyd, we have not been immune to those situations before. However, I do think that we have always been so busy and moving, and life has been going so fast, that the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic when that occurred, we were slowing down enough that everyone had to give pause and pay attention and then respond. You could not ignore it, because you could not continue going about your daily life without acknowledging that there's really something wrong here. And so I think COVID-19 has not only given us pause and time to reflect on what's important in life, but it has also given us an opportunity to acknowledge the very injustice of life. This is not new. These atrocities have been occurring, you know, for us for over 400 years. However, now that we have been in a time where we have all been closer together as families, we've been able to have discussions when we see these incidents, when we see the rallies and the protests. It has given families an opportunity to come together and to acknowledge that there is a need for change. And not just families who are black, not just families of color, but if you are a human being, you do not know anyone who has not been impacted by this pandemic, number one. And number two, if you're a human being, you cannot look at the brutalities that men and people and women of color have endured for years and ignore it any longer. So for that, COVID-19 that has been a benefit. It has allowed us to slow down and pause and really examine where we are and what changes we need to make.
I think that going to California from North Carolina, I recognized how different both of those areas were. Stanford's a PWI, which stands for predominantly white institution, but in a way, moving to Stanford, I found a home in the Black community that I never had in Wilmington. And that was something that was so impactful for me, because for the first time as a Black woman who I was, I felt incredibly accepted. So with the rise of COVID, I moved home back to Wilmington, which is a town that has racial trauma and racial history embedded within it. And the silent racism in Wilmington, I think we're starting to see it's bearing its ugly head as some events that have happened recently. However, I've seen a lot of allies, particularly student allies, step up, and I'm so appreciative of that. I led a Black Lives Matter protest just a few weeks ago with friends of mine who were majority white, and so I think I'm seeing a turn in tide in the white community of recognizing the role that they play in systemic racism and how to be anti-racist and support the Black community as we see Black people murdered on camera every single day. So I think with COVID and all of the senseless murders that have occurred over the past months, it has been really traumatic for the Black community as a whole, but I'm hopeful that the momentum that has arisen continues as we continue the fight to be anti-racist, because the systems in place that allow these things to continue to happen won't be eroded in just a day. It's a long fight, and so I hope people can continue that momentum so that we can make a change.
I think what has been fascinating to me, if I could use that word, is pre-COVID, I was seeing things, but now post and during COVID-19, I'm looking at things. And as one of our speakers said before me, this season has allowed all of us just to pause and look deeply at things. During this season, when atrocities like George Floyd happened, and the whole world got to see it on stage, doing Trayvon Martin or Sandra Bland or Fidel Castile, I would go into my silos and talk to people who looked like me about it. But this incident being so broad, and everybody saw it in every country, no matter what language, no matter what creed, no matter what color, since everybody saw it, what's been amazing to me is that we're no longer talking in our silos, but our conversations have become cross-pollination. And I've been on so many conversations with white brothers and white sisters, Black brothers and Black sisters, and we're having, for the first time that I can remember, the hard conversations, and no one is on either side trying to prove who's right or who's wrong, but the conversations are leading to a common ground, and where do we go from here? So that has tremendously changed my life, and just participating in it has been a big change, and one I'm looking forward to.
Let's see, so COVID has been difficult, just a big transition in slowing down, and just everything that's normal is no longer normal, so that's been a change. I think with what's going on in the world, it's been extremely difficult for me, a lot of confusion, a lot of empathy, where I want to have empathy and I want to understand. I reached out to Sharon just to kind of have some conversations, so she could, I'm hoping that we could have some conversations to help me understand. So I think it's just raised awareness for me, and empathy and a compassion, but also bits of confusion where I'd like to have conversations and to have real dialogue and to understand, and just to have a place of understanding.
There's a couple points I want to bring up about the COVID situation in relation to healthcare and the quarantine lockdown scenario that we were kind of living under. The first thing is to the lockdown and the way things were about a month ago, I've seen a lot of people open up their point of view. I've seen a lot of people willing to have discussion. My white friends, I hate to say that, but I've seen a lot of them wanting to have more conversation about it. But I also have seen a lot of people, that are white double down on their anger, their being upset about a perceived injustice to them, and just denying that systemic racism exists in America. So that's one of the things I've seen is a furthering split there, but some people kind of have gone over to start to open their ears and listen more. The second thing that I've seen as a healthcare provider is that there is definitely a disparity between racial medicine as far as white people get opiates at a higher rate. If you go to the ER and hurt something, they're going to give you that more often than they are a person of color, and that's statistics that we can look at clear as day, and that's something that we need to change there. So it's kind of carried forward. I have a good friend named Braxton that has been doing some nursing aid traveling, going from place to place in New York City, Queens, Brooklyn, and one of the things that he keeps bringing up to me when we discuss the subject of that is that the predominantly white affluent areas have more of the things they need. Personal protective equipment, masks, ventilators, things like that, but in communities of color, they don't have those tools to protect themselves, to protect the community. So it just goes to show that we still have a lot of work to do as far as that goes, and we need to bring that to light and put to bed this nonsense that systemic racism does not exist in America, because that is an outright lie.
So since COVID has reared its head and we've been going through all these different things and all these different changes, I think one of the biggest things I've seen is that where everybody else is saying that people are able to say their opinion, and I think people being in the house has kind of given them a bolder stance. As Wesley said, white folks are saying, well, why are these black people acting this way? And black folks are saying, well, why are these white people acting this way? Because they don't have to actually see each other. One of my famous quotes is, I say what I want because I can fight. So when you see people in real life, it's different. I think that COVID-19 has given people a sense of security, so they can say what they want to say and do what they want to say behind the keyboard. And then when it actually comes time to interact with those persons in public, then it's, oh, well, I ain't really mean this. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. So now that we're face to face, let's have this conversation face to face, and let's understand each other. I think in relation to COVID-19, and you just heard from Wesley, who is a healthcare provider and is in it, when people say it's a hoax and different things of that nature, the conversations that are being had need to be and should be, instead of them being, well, I think they need to be factually based, just like the race conversations need to be factually based, instead of people saying, I think it needs to be, well, this is the case for me. And then we can have a conversation and have it be an intelligent conversation instead of people throwing bars back and forth and hiding behind the keyboard.
Thank you so much, panel, for sharing with us the transition, because we transitioned really quickly from COVID-19. Actually, we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and then all of a sudden we see the George Floyd, and the world is awakening. And I am in agreement 110% with Krista when she said that the Lord paused us so that everyone could see what was going on. There was no one at the golf course, and there was no one at the tennis court, and there was no one playing basketball or football. We were all home, all across the world, able to see such a horrible thing happen, but such a powerful movement. It has caused us to pause and examine ourselves and see what we can do to do different. So where do we go from here? And this is why Respus Live is having a town hall on tonight, because after I watched that video, Danielle, my life changed. I will never be the same again. And where I sat quietly, now I have a platform to share with thousands of people that we need to go from here into a place where all people are created equal in every aspect of life. My next question is for Krista, and she's in education. The first question I have for you, Krista, is how have you seen systemic racism affect children of color?
And I want to speak to that from the reference of George Floyd. There are George Floyds in our classrooms and in our school buildings every day. We can begin with our district lines. Our schools are segregated, but they're now called neighborhood schools. And so many of our children, our young black children, are in schools that they are being served by teachers who may be inexperienced. They're impacted greatly by poverty. And our laws and our general statutes say, from the federal level to the state, that these children will be successful by a certain grade level. And you wonder what their chances are when they are already entering behind. But when I say I want to speak to this from the perspective of George Floyd, the criminalization of black boys and brown boys begins from the very moment that they walk through our school doors. If you look at the disproportionality of our suspension rates, we'll go before that. You look at the disproportionality of office referrals that starts even in pre-K. You look at the disproportionality of referrals for children for special education services, our George Floyds. They are behind the ball before they even walk through our doors or as they walk through the doors. A student of color may commit the same offense. He may not be given the same opportunity to explain himself. He may be sent to the office. A student who is not of color may be described as precocious or curious when he's over there playing with blocks and building, where a little student who might be a younger George Floyd, he can't follow directions. And so therefore we have to begin to think about, what are we doing? What decisions are we making? How are we perceiving our young men? And it's fear. Someone will ask, why is racism so prevalent? It is bred in fear. What is it about the color of our skin that evokes fear? What is it about that would make you think that this little boy or this little girl, that they can't be precocious, that they can't have an opportunity to explain themselves, the same opportunity that you would give someone else? When you look at recommendations for alternative programs and you walk into those schools, who do you see? And so I would venture to say that systemic racism is impacting our children greatly. Not only that, access to academically gifted programs, access to AP courses, which starts when our children are very young, and even the brightest of our children, someone is always second guessing them. And so what does that mean? Not only for those of us who are of color in this world of education, but our white teachers have to begin to be bold and to speak up and to advocate for all children to have opportunities. And when someone negates the ability level or the potential of a child of color, we need to have our white brothers and sisters who are in education to stand up and say, I see something different in that child, and he or she needs to have the same opportunity.
Thank you so much, Krista. It was packed with so many nuggets. It was just so amazing. I was just trying to take it all in because those points are so valid today, and these are the things that we need to talk about, and we need to actually have teachers that are concerned. And my girlfriend Pamela made a statement. She says, it amazes me how people that are racist and don't love children want to become teachers and want to influence the young minds. And that is so true. And it is time for us to do something about that. We've seen it happen for years and years, but our children, African American children, black children, deserve the same right as every other child. So thank you so much. And another question is, what are 3 things, Krista, that you would recommend that could begin to shift the school system to a just system for teachers, for school board, and for the school system?
I think for teachers, we need to begin to hold teachers accountable. And a lot of times, I'm a principal, and this is what I've been saying to my teachers this summer. I have the authority, but the power The power lies with each other. I can set an expectation, but holding each other accountable. And this is what I've been saying as well. When you are in your proverbial socially distant circle, and someone makes an off-color remark, and I'm not talking about when you're outside of school, I'm talking about when you're in a teacher's lounge. What do you do and how do you respond? Because that's where the power is. So I think teachers also have to educate themselves and begin to learn about what it means to have white privilege. It is real, and so many times it's dismissed. But understanding what that means, there's a powerful text called White Fragility, and I recommend that, and it's White Fragility, Why White People Can't Talk About Race. It is a powerful text, and many of the experiences that I have had, I see in that text. I think for school boards, I think our school board needs to look at its governing documents. Right here in New Hanover County, if you would look at the strategic plan from 2016 till 2020, it states we will have racially diverse schools. We will not have low-performing schools. We have both. If you would look at the documents for guiding our redistricting policies, it talks about having students in schools that are close to their homes, but it also speaks to having schools that are diverse. I wish you would drive around when we can go back into our schools and take a look. As a matter of fact, all you need to do is go and look at the school report cards. And when you look at the school report cards and then you go around and you look at demographics, that tells a story in itself. For our school systems, let's begin to look at our hiring practices and our recruiting practices. We have highly qualified people who are of color, who can make a tremendous impact on our children. However, we have to be bold enough to give them a chance. We have to begin to create programs, and New Hanover County has recently done that, where we have programs where we're offering support for assistants who would like to go back and get certified to teach. Here's what we also need to do. We need to think about positions for people of color that are not in the cafeteria and not coming out of the custodial closet. We have much more to offer our children than that. And I think those are some of the things that we need to do. And I'll tell you that something that we all need to do. We all need to vote. We all need to vote, and we need to make sure that the people who we are electing to guide the education of our children in our communities, we need to make sure that they understand what equity means and that they are making decisions that exemplify equity for all of our children.
Thank you so much, Krista. Thank you for sharing with us on tonight some things that we can do to shift the school system so it becomes a just system for all. Now I have a question for this young college student that's with us on tonight. I wanted to ask you, Janae, what are some of the changes you've seen and some of the issues you've had to deal with as a young black female while in college?
I think it started before college. I think that black women in this country are under attack, period. I think that black women find themselves at not only the hands of systemic racism, but also the patriarchy that this country is built off of. And so when you're at the intersection of sexism and racism, black women are neglected, black women are disrespected, and they're not protected. We see Sandra Bland. We see that the cops who killed Breonna Taylor have still not been arrested. Trans black women have been killed over the past few weeks, and a protester who was 19, I am almost 19, was killed. And black women face these things every single day in America. I think for me, growing up as a black woman, it was who people thought I should be as a black woman when they weren't even black themselves. It was the stereotypes that black women have encountered for centuries about being irrational or mad or unarticulate or impregnated. And when I was articulate or I was serious about my education, I was automatically labeled white. And it wasn't until I really sat down and had a conversation with people like, what are we saying when we say that? We're taking positive characteristics that not only myself has faced this, I've met so many black women in college at Stanford. All of us had this common theme of growing up, we were called white. Growing up, we weren't accepted as being quote unquote black because of A, B, or C, whether we said television instead of TV or wore certain clothes to school. And it's why are we treating black women that way, and why are we saying that a certain set of characteristics cannot belong to one race, but it can belong to the other? When you call a black woman who's articulate white, you're saying that if she were black, she can't be articulate. Why can't black women just be articulate? Why can't black women just be passionate and ambitious and beautiful? The number of things that I've heard, whether it's you're pretty for a black girl, or, you know, I don't think you can do that, or you're not supposed to be doing that, you shouldn't speak up, you should just sit down. I think it's so damaging for young black women who have so much potential in this country. I'm an entrepreneur, and the fastest group of people who are starting businesses are young black women, and that's amazing. But the systems in this country that continue to oppress them have to be eradicated if we're gonna see black women starting to get freedom and the respect that they deserve. And I think that the black community as a whole, and this nation as a whole, needs to have a conversation about how we treat black women, because it is unacceptable from Wilmington, North Carolina to Stanford, where I do go to college. Black women are continuously disrespected, and the patriarchy and misogyny that continues to affect black women has to end, because it's had an effect on my life, and I'm not even 19. So I can't even imagine what older black women have faced all throughout their lives. And I don't want to live in a society where my daughter has faced the same problems that I have. So something needs to change.
Thank you so much, Janae. At this time, we'll have Wes come up, and we're going to ask questions about the community. Wes, what are some suggestions that you have to increase unity and fairness within our communities?
For unity and fairness in the community, we need to know each other. We need to be friends with each other. We need to see each other as more than a color, more than, you know, what kind of music you listen to pigeonhole somebody into a group. Just go into school at UNC Chapel Hill. I know it's definitely a predominantly white school there, but I will say that in my time there, I learned so much from people of color, whether it be a Muslim friend from India, whether it be a black gentleman from the Outer Banks. It just, being in that melting pot and living with other people and being outside of my bubble of Brunswick County, it showed me that there's nothing to fear by a person being black or brown or different than me. They have different experiences, and we can learn from each other. So that's one of the things that I really want to see starting earlier in school. You hit the nail on the head earlier, I have to say. That was excellent what you were saying. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your, don't remember your name, but the principal,
Yes.
That was outstanding what you said there. So those kind of things, as far as integrating schools, more closely to the population mix that we have, is step number one. That'll be an easy fix, I would say, to move forward. I'm going to get in trouble for what I'm about to say, but to kind of piggyback on what you were talking about, the media, the way they portray black women versus white women, and specifically first ladies. I hate to bring up politics in this, but whenever you look at Michelle Obama, the media just tore apart for wearing a sleeveless dress one day to an event. In Melania Trump is posed nude. So to see that disparity there, and then, white folks don't care about that, but if you see, I'm gonna get in trouble for this, my wife's gonna kill me for saying this, but it's the honest to God truth. I mean, if we can sit there and talk about that, and that's part of the problem right there, that people really are not looking at that as an issue, and it really is. And until the media fixes their problem to have that bias there to discuss issues that aren't issues, that's not a thing. She wore a sleeveless dress, or Obama wore a tan suit. It's no big deal. It's okay. But to point that out and to tear people apart because of that, and women as well, it's terrible. And that's something we need to fix. So I'm sorry I kind of changed subject.
You're okay.
I really wanted to hit that point because that was a good one.
It really was. Thank you so much, Wes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to ask Pastor Armour to come up, and this is a question in reference to church. Pastor Armour, how do you motivate and encourage those that are angry, that are bitter, that are upset, and they're simply tired? How do we encourage them? I was looking on Facebook and I was reading some posts that my classmates had posted about how angry they were because all of a sudden now they're finding out that their friends from high school was really racist, or the people that sit in the cube next to them is really racist. I mean, it's just exposing so many people, and some people take it and become angry and bitter, and so we have them walking around now like on the edge. Right. There are so many people on the edge. Mm-hmm. So from a spiritual perspective, how do we take what has happened and what we're finding out and how people are being exposed? How do we take that? How do we begin healing? And how do we get them to rid the anger and the bitterness? How do we do that?
Well, first of all, wonderful question. Thank you, Sharon. I'm pretty much a bit angry now when you called me up because I kind of wanted to sit down and listen to Krista and listen to Janae because they were really, really. I was just excited. I was a fan, but I'm just playing though. But and Janae is a member of my church. Just wanted to say that. But I think that as we look at the history of our movements here. Our movements over the world, especially the civil rights movement when it comes to pushing the black agenda. I don't know if we have a generation that is going to protest like Martin Luther King, to protest like Ralph David Abernathy. That was a nonviolent movement. But we have such a generation now that's leading this movement. I believe the one point of healing we need to do is to move from a nonviolent movement to a non-aggressive movement. We're going to have to sit down at the table and we're going to have to make some changes. It's going to take all of us together. I mentioned earlier about the cross-pollination of conversation. I have white friends now who are listening. I have black friends now who are speaking up. I believe when George Floyd hit everybody's screen or smartphone or wherever you had your smart device, I believe it awakened the African Americans once again, but it enlightened white America. And I was speaking to someone earlier about the riots. Someone just sent me a post of some of the riots that were happening in New York City. We remember when this situation first happened with George Floyd, there were riots everywhere. And people begin to jump on the bandwagon to quote what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. quoted. Back in the 60s, he said that the riots are the language of the unheard. And if I was to remix that in today, in the 21st century, I would say if riots are the language of the unheard, then we need to teach the unheard how to be bilingual. Because we're going to have to teach a different language and have a different message if we want change to come, if we want healing to come. I'm a preacher, so I don't want to get preachy, but since I'm in the pulpit, the Bible does say that we have the power within us. Greater is he that's in me than he that is in the world. I grew up with my grandmother telling me that I can do all things through Christ who gives me the strength. So if I can do all things, just think if we got together, then we can do anything. And so to begin to healing, we're going to have the hard conversations. To begin the healing, we're going to have to move from a nonviolent to a non-aggressive movement that we can make change come. I believe that, Sharon, is the beginning of the healing. There's a lot of layers, but I know teamwork makes the dream work, and we're going to have to do it together.
Thank you so much. Pastor Glaze.
Aquanetta, I have a question for you concerning our electoral process. How can we convince those who do not believe voting changes things because of the world that we live in today, and people vote, and then we get presidents like the one we have now, so people are convinced that voting doesn't change anything? How can we convince people that voting is their power?
I think that we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. But basically, we need more training, classes on how to vote, why we should vote, why does it make a difference, see some of the changes that have come because of some of the voting that has taken place, like with the education system, Brown versus Brown, and some other different things that have taken place that have helped the judicial system. For the most part, I think we need to realize that we want to put people in office that are going to speak up for us, because basically, if you don't have money or you don't have, you're not in a high position, people don't hear you. And so we need someone that's there that's going to voice these things. And it's time out for sitting back and saying, oh, they can do it. We've got to step up and do what we need to do, because that's really where the problem lies, is that we've put our trust in the hands of people that don't have our best interests in mind.
Thank you so much. Thank you. There is a comment by Rich Murray on our feed, and I'll read it to you, and I ask Troy to reply to him. His comment is, bull. How about teaching people to be accountable for their actions? You talk about being accepted of others, but if someone doesn't agree with your ideology, they are a racist. People are getting too sensitive. They can't handle basic life situations because they're too quick to judge and become a victim. And if you want to get rid of racism, stop breaking people into black and white. We are Americans.
Okay, Rich, so we are Americans, yep. You're right, but you're a white American and I'm a black American. If race wasn't such a big thing in America, it wouldn't be the quantifying and qualifying factor in everything, every single thing that you do. Why do they ask for your race on a job application? Why do they ask for your race on a credit application? Why do they ask for your race on et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Because it is what America has used forever and ever and ever to qualify and quantify you as a person. Just like my young sister was saying, she is viewed as a certain way or not viewed as a certain way because of what the perception is, because she is supposed to be a certain way because she is a certain color. That's just what we're steeped in. And to say that people should be accountable for their actions, I don't see where anybody is not being accountable for their actions. Speaking for myself as a black male, my argument is not, well, we should get off. We should get off scot-free. If you do something, then you should be held accountable for your actions, correct? What should also happen is if I rob somebody, right? The same judgment that somebody else that is not a person of color, I should be allowed to be arrested and have the same respect that some white individual has, or somebody that is not me. I have not seen the George Floyd videotape. Why have I not seen it? Because I watched Philando die, I watched Rodney King, and I am very familiar with what happened to Emmett Till. If you're not familiar with what happened to Emmett Till, all you have to do is Google it. So you say people are getting too sensitive. Well, what do you expect? When you are a person of color and you have been through certain situations, and that's one of my things when I talk to people that are not people of color about the experience of being a person of color and what we have to go through and what the experience is. If you do not know how it is or what it is to be a person of color, how can you give a valid assessment of my feelings, my emotions, where I'm coming from? You can't. That's why we have to have a progressive dialogue like we're having here, and be able to understand each other and where each other are coming from without saying someone is too quick to judge. I've been black for 35 years. I didn't just start doing this yesterday. The only thing that is an equalizer in my eyes, and I don't know if the other panelists will agree, is the amount of money that you have, because that allows you to get in some different conversations. But even at the end of the day, like Kanye says, and I don't particularly agree with Kanye and everything that he says, but even if you're in a Benz, you're still a nigga in a coupe, right? Because the money doesn't really matter, because you're still going to have to say someone to say, in the case of law enforcement, what are you doing driving that, and where are you going driving that? So back to, or being specific about being Americans, at this juncture and at further junctures, we are white Americans and black Americans. Now, what we have to do is continue to have these dialogues, like I previously stated, and be able to understand where each other are coming from.
I just wanted to say, in response to the comment, it is unfair at best to say that we are all Americans when America was founded on the backs of black and brown people, and we have never been just looked at as Americans. We have been looked at as black people. Saying that you don't see my color and saying that we are all Americans and therefore that we are all equal is not okay. I need you to see my color because I need you to understand the trauma that people who look like me have gone through for centuries. Saying that you don't see my color is basically not acknowledging the racism that I still face and the racism that people who look like me who faced for centuries. I need you to recognize that as a white individual, although you did not contribute to slavery firsthand, the systems that are present still in America today, because of slavery, you benefit from. And so to make a statement like that to black people is not okay. I need you to see color. I need you to see your white privilege. I need you to see that I'm a black woman, because I need you to understand what we all are going through.
Furthermore, to that point, you have to also understand that systemic racism is not a myth. Yes, you do have an advantage. Yes, white privilege is a real thing. Yes, and yes, and yes, and more yes. So again, thank you so much. But again, those types of conversations, when someone says to you, Caucasian male, white privilege is a thing. No, it ain't. Well, you're white. So you wouldn't understand white privilege being a real thing because, again, I've been black for 35 years. So I know what it is to be black. I don't know what it is specifically to be white, but I can understand the advantages that come with being white, going into different places and people not having to look at you a certain way or to have to do a certain thing or to have to sound a certain way to get your point across. So as we continue to have these conversations and these dialogues, and I'd be more than willing to sit down with you or anybody that would like to have an intelligent conversation on what it is to be black versus being white, and we can actually have a talk about it whenever y'all get ready.
Tina, I have a question for you. As a parent, how are you helping your children to walk through this bold awareness, I would suspect for the first time in their lives, of the differences and the systemic racism? How are you parenting them to become more aware of what's going on in the world and empowering them to do something different?
So I'm fortunate. My children are very intelligent and very socially aware. So we have had many conversations frequently over many topics, not just racism, but we have had multiple conversations frequently. So they very much are up with current events. They very much keep in touch with things. We attend church. We very much treat each other like we want to be treated. We very much believe people are created equal. So I have those types of conversations with them just from a faith-based. But politically, socially, they are very aware of everything that's going on, and we have a lot of really good discussions. We don't see eye to eye on everything. We still love each other. So we're able to have those heated discussions or heated differences on social things and still love each other. So
Thank you, Tina, and I can attest that going to high school, Tina and I went to high school together, and it didn't matter what color our skins were. We were friends, and we were true friends, and we shared together softball, basketball. We played together. I'm so grateful, Tina, that when we were in high school, it didn't matter because we would go to Keith Daniels' house and have a party.
Yeah.
We'd go to Sharnita's house and have a party. We'd go to Lake Artesia and have a party. So we hung out together. So I'm grateful for growing up in an environment where color really wasn't an issue. And I was sitting here trying to think what was my first experience with racism, and I really can't tell you other than walking in a store in Burgaw. I think it was Harold Department Store, and some lady following me around like I was going to steal something. But other than that, I never really had to face it because growing up, I had friends of all colors because my grandmother taught us the importance of looking at a person's heart versus their skin. But Wes, I would love to ask you about your son. You're raising a son, you and Ashley. And by the way, Ashley is an amazing person. Her heart is so beautiful, and I fell in love with her, working with her, because you could see the true intent of her heart, and it didn't matter the color of your skin.
Absolutely.
And she's an amazing woman. So you're blessed to have an amazing wife that I truly consider a friend. But how will you and Ashley raise your son to understand what's going on in the world?
Well, the first thing I would say is you know, you hear the common comment of, I don't see color. I don't see that. That's disingenuous at best, because you're going to get me in trouble over here now. It is disingenuous at best, though, to say those kind of things, because people of color have something to contribute as far as culturally, spiritually, you know, arts, language. You guys, it's something that is a beautiful thing that we can all share together, because we have our culture, you have your culture, and we can all learn from each other. That's one thing I want to teach my son, is that, you know, people have different skin, but they're all the same underneath it. It's the content of their character and their actions that define them. And teaching him that way, I think we can help get rid of this one generation at a time. And that's really what it's going to take, is education. Just teaching others that people have value, no matter what color their skin is. They are valuable to America. They are valuable to the world. And that's just something we got to, hate to say it, just beat into the heads of the population of this country. And that is something we just can't tolerate anymore. If he heard his friend say something that was racist, you got to teach him to stay. You can't let that go. You can't let that slide.
Yes.
Whenever you hear, you know, I hate to say it, as an adult, it's things I've heard, you know, when white people are together and one of them might be a racist, they feel comfortable, they feel empowered because there's no person of color around them. And there's professionals that I've heard use that kind of language that I would never expect in a million years. So I want my son to be strong enough to stand up and say, you know what, that's not okay. I'm not going to be around somebody that has that kind of hate in their heart, and hopefully have the conversation with them as to why they feel that way. That's the kind of man I hope I can raise, and hopefully he can impart that on the world as he gets a little older.
Thank you, Wes. I'm sure
Thank
you
you.
will. So, Krista, there's a question. We're going to talk about election, because that's one way we can change. Where do we go from here? To the polls? Vote, you know. So I think if it has ever been a time now that we need to vote, it is now. Now is the time for us to vote. And if you want to make a change, if you want to be a part of the movement, register to vote and then go vote. So, Krista, my question would, what do you believe could change if a majority of people of color voted?
I think that we do have the power to determine who is going to be our elected officials. I really do. I think we have to embrace the power of the vote. And we are in the situation that we're in now because we did not go to the polls. We chose, and we said that it didn't make a difference. We saw the power that we have in 2008. We saw the power that we have to elect who it is that we think would best represent us. And what we have to stop doing is resting on our laurels and know that every time we have an opportunity, we need to do that. But we can't just show up for the big elections. This happens in our local municipalities. We have to take advantage of every opportunity that we have to vote. And we also have to educate ourselves. So many times we're overwhelmed and we go in and we just want to vote straight ticket, or we vote for the person we know or who someone is telling us about. But we have to begin to educate ourselves and to learn the politics of those who are running for office. We have to know what it is that they stand for, what is it they represent, and how well will they represent us and what it is that we value and what it is that we stand for. And so, do we have the power to change this world, this nation with our vote? Indeed, we do. But we have an even greater responsibility to make changes in our local government, and that's where we need to remember to vote in those midterm elections.
Okay, one more question before we go to Pastor Armour to wrap this up. Krista, how can we convince those who do not believe that voting changes things to vote? As you stated earlier, so many of us really feel that our vote it doesn't count, and if we go, it doesn't make a difference. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people stay home and don't vote. So is there anything that you could possibly share that will help them understand the urgency where we are now to find out who our local representatives are, to find out who we need to vote for, to be an informed voter? Just not vote for anyone, but just understand who they are, what they represent. Is this someone that we want to represent us?
I think one of the things that a lot of times we hear people say is you can't talk about politics in the workplace, or this is not the place to talk about politics. I think we need to begin to engage in conversations wherever we can. I also think that, and you know you're going to Pastor Armour next, but I think there's power in the Black church. There is power from the pulpit. And I also think that recognizing that power and influence that's there, and many times we often only see certain politicians when they're running for office. They tend to show up on the first Sunday and they want about 5 minutes. Well, if you can't show up at other places and other times to talk to me about what it is that you're going to do to represent what it is that our people need, then I don't need to see you on the first Sunday for 5 minutes. I think we have to begin to acknowledge that that's what's happening. You know, come out when we're doing something with the youth. Come out and be a part of that and engage and talk to our young people. I really feel that we have to hold those folks who are running for local office accountable.
Yes.
They can't just depend on, let's just call it what it is, the Black vote, because you showed up and you spoke for 5 minutes.
Yes.
What is your agenda? What are you going to do? And we need to hold them accountable for that. And if we vote and you don't do it, then we do not vote for you at the next election.
Exactly.
We have political power, and we need to be bold enough to exercise it. And we also need to remember this new generation, someone died, not someone, many people died so that we could go in and exercise our power. So we have the right, and because we have the right, you don't have the right to stay at home on election day.
Thank you so much. And so, Pastor Armour, we're going to shift over to you because she did mention the church and how important it is for the leaders of the church to grab a hold of this movement and move forward. So how do you do that?
Well, the church has always been the social voice for the Black community. And it may have seemed that we have kind of lost sight of that. But the situation that's happening now is awakening us again. We have to go back to being a social voice for our community. For the first time in our history, the Black agenda, when it comes to the civil rights movement, this protest was led without the church being in the forefront. And I really believe that the church has to realize, how do we change the package without changing the product? The product for the church is always Jesus and Him crucified. But how do we make that applicable? How do we turn our scriptures into votes? How do we turn our sermons into motivations? How do we get people off of the pew into the streets? And now we have 16 weeks to kind of think about that, to come up with our plan. But it is now time more than ever that we not only do voter registration, but as Krista just said, we have to do voter education. We have to learn who's in office, who we need to put in office, and putting people in office that will be fair to everyone. And so the church has to get behind that, if not in the forefront of that. The church cannot look for a space to try to be the head. It is now for the church to be the support. My grandmother used to always say, "On Christ, the solid rock I stand." I still believe the church is that solid rock that stands on the grounds of the community, and we can launch our people in the right direction. So the church does have the power. We just need the church to rise up and also lead in the leadership.
Thank you so much, Pastor Armour.
Speaking to that and to the premise of why we are here, where do we go from here? So in Brunswick County, well, let me answer the question. Where do we go from here? So my thing is we have to start where we can actually put hands on and we actually can do something where we are. Brunswick County residents, Black Brunswick County residents, period. We have an ally in Sheriff John Ingram. I spoke to him personally after the Philando Castile incident 4 years ago now, and I told him then that we had an issue. So after this last incident, he brought a group of us together, black, white, what have you, and we started having a dialogue, an open dialogue like this, an open conversation on what we can do to make sure that Brunswick County does not become one of those places on CNN where we see something like happen with Philando, George, et cetera, et cetera. So we just have to continue to move forward and have those dialogues, keep talking, and hold the people that we have at a local level. Hold their feet to the fire. That's what they're there for. One of the things he said to me when we started having our conversations was, the misconception is that we are here for this purpose. We work for you. We are here for you. I'm speaking of Brunswick County. I'm not talking about nowhere else. I'm talking about Brunswick County right now. So our sheriff, John Ingram, is there for us. So what we are going to do, working for it, and again, I encourage anybody that has any ideas on what we can do, how we can continue to build and uplift, get in touch with me, and let's keep moving forward.
Thank you, Troy. Janae?
The person that I learned about racism most from on an academic level was my professor, Stephen Roberts, in the psychology department at Stanford. I took a class, like I said, called How to Make a Racist in fall, and the last day of class, he shared a story about his personal life. His dad was Black. He actually grew up here in North Carolina, and when he went to the military, he met his white mother in Germany. And one day, they were going to a bar in Germany with another biracial couple after he had been born. And these white men in the bar began to harass both couples because they were biracial. And they left the bar, and his mother and father went back and forth for a while about whether they should go back in. And eventually, his dad went back in while his mom waited outside. And she waited outside for a few minutes until eventually she went back in and found that he'd been beaten in the bar by those men until he was brain dead. And my professor never saw or spoke to his father again. And as a Black man, I can only imagine how hard that is. And he told this to our class in tears. And he said that he wasn't even so infuriated by the people who'd beaten his father to death, but more so the people in the bar who watched and did nothing. And so I think if we're having the discussion of where we should go from here, the most important thing is to never be a bystander in situations of oppression. And I think we have to ask each and every one of ourselves, if we're those people in the bar, obviously not in systems, not in situations as intense, but even whether it's an offhand comment or something you see that's not okay, are you being a bystander or are you actively being anti-racist? In a society, in a country where this country was built off of racism, if you are not a person of color, you have to recognize that just by existing and participating in the systems that were built off of racism, you are participating in racism by default if you're not actively being anti-racist. And I think when we can shift our definition of racism from a Southern white man saying the N-word to the systems that continue to oppress a certain group of people in this country, then we can begin to see how we can each be anti-racist and eradicate those systems.
Thank you so much, Janae, for showing us and telling us where do we go from here. We heard it first from Janae. I just want to take the opportunity to thank everyone on tonight. This has been a great discussion. I want to thank the panelists for taking the time out of your schedule and being a part of Respus Live. Krista Holland, thank you so much for sharing out of the depths of your heart and leaving so many nuggets. As I began to go through the comments, people were just saying, thank you, Krista, for just sharing so much about the school system and what we can do, because we just didn't want to have a conversation without some action. So we thank each of you for sharing the action that we each can do. Cleveland Troy Simmons, thank you so much for being a part of this panel, and I know your mom is smiling down on you tonight. You're an amazing young man, and keep speaking up for what you believe in and standing firm in what you believe in. Wesley Hickman, Dr. Hickman, thank you so much for coming and being a part of Respus Live. This is your second time with us. I just want to thank you for your transparency and how I know it's difficult as a white male to get up and say some of the things that you said, but I applaud you and commend you for stepping out and making a difference. Where do we go from here? We can take an example from Wesley Hickman as to where we go from here. We can stand up, we can come together, we can speak against things that are not right, because as Janae said, if we stand by and watch, our hands have the same blood as the person that has convicted the crime. Thank you so much, Janae Young, for sharing so much with us on tonight and allowing us to see that racism can still come from our own. Our African-American people can be racist against us. Thank you for showing us how to be an empowered woman in 2020. Thank you for opening up and just giving us a perspective from a college student, not even 19 years old yet. I am amazed at you and your wisdom, and I can't wait to see what God will do with your life, young lady. Tina, thank you so much for coming on tonight. As I stated earlier, we went to high school together, and we've always been friends. Tina reached out to me after this, and she wanted to have a conversation because she wanted to make a change. That's what it's supposed to be like. Once we see something, we look at ourselves, and we can see how we can make a change. And we wanted the change to start with she and I conversing and worshiping together and spending time together. Tina, I thank you for stepping out on tonight and being a part of this panel and letting us know that you don't agree with everything, but you do agree with some things. And we are so grateful to understand that you're going to push forward to understand more about this movement. Aquanetta Beatty, thank you so much for coming on tonight and for sharing and for being a part of this panel. Thank you for all that you do in the community. You didn't just start, you've been working in the community for so long, and we thank you for pouring into this community and being an activist and moving forward. Thank you for being here. Pastor Armour, thank you for being on Respus Live again. We thank God for you for coming and sharing and giving us a spiritual perspective as to what we need to do next and where do we need to go from here. Each of us, if you're watching tonight, I challenge you to look at yourself and see what you can do to make a difference. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, Just Cut It Barbershop and Dr. Emerson. Thank you so much for planting a seed into Respus Live. I want to thank the Advanced Concepts of Southport for being a sponsor for Respus Live. If you would like to sponsor Respus Live, our information will be at the bottom, and you can sponsor us. And what I call this a ministry, because at Respus Live, we love everybody, and we understand that in the eyesight of God, everybody is somebody. I want to thank A&A Promotion for the intro music. I want to thank my wardrobe on tonight, Manic Makeover Design by Sheena Hewitt. Thank you so much. And a special shout out to my pastor, the Reverend Dr. Terry L. Henry, and the Macedonia Church family for opening the doors for us on tonight so that we can have a discussion about where do we go from here. It is my prayer that each of you will have an amazing evening, and I pray that something is said that will change your life and change the way that you move so that when we move forward through this movement, we can sit back on the porch with our grandchildren and say that we were part of the movement and that we did something. Thank you, Pastor Glaze, for being here and for your support. And thank you, Jamie, for being an amazing producer. May God's peace be with each of you until we meet again. God bless you.